Hi, thanks for tuning in. It's Paul Laverne, registered psychotherapist and sexual recovery therapist. I've been in private practice for about 11 years, and I work with a lot of the common issues that people come into counseling for. But one of my main focuses is working with compulsive sexual behaviors. I work with porn and sex addicts as well as their partners. And I'm really happy to be here today with Gavin. So Gavin Sharpe is a UK qualified psychotherapist, certified sex addiction therapist. So that's a CSAT, C-A-C-S-A-T, and a psychosexual therapist. Gavin works with individuals, couples, and groups looking to make profound changes in their relationships and lives. Gavin lives and works in Monaco. So he's pretty far, Gavin. We're hoping the internet connection holds up here. So far, so good. And he runs his own practice, Riviera Wellbeing, for English-speaking clients. He also runs a number of therapy intensives and workshops for people in recovery, including recovery from various intimacy disorders. Gavin's work has been published in the national UK media, and he frequently writes for the media in Monaco. Gavin has a monthly radio show, The Well-Being Window, on Riviera Radio 106.5 FM. Previously, Gavin worked as a lawyer and entrepreneur in the city of London. That sounds like an interesting story, maybe for another time. So, hi, Gavin. How are you?
I'm very good, Paul. Good to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm really glad you agreed to do this. Let's get right into it. So tell me exactly what you do in your work. I know you work with other types of clients as well, but specifically as a sex addiction therapist, and why and how in the world did you get into this kind of work?
So great start. So as you said, I'm based here in Monaco, and I work with the English-speaking communities. And when I moved here, I wasn't really sure what type of work I would specialize in. So having come from the UK, I pretty much specialized there in working with sex and love and porn addiction. So when I arrived in Monaco about 6 years ago, I kept it more broad, thinking, I don't know what's going to come through the door. Is it going to be too specialized? And I guess maybe because it's a large number of addicts early in recovery or just starting their journey found their way to my doorstep. And I guess like any other major city, whether it's New York, Chicago, London, Paris, there's an intensity, to the lifestyle here. And so before long, what I found was that individuals and couples, not just with sex addiction, I'm sure we'll get onto this, but a lot of the time someone comes to see me and the presenting issue might be, I'm having some problems with alcohol, or I'm having some problems with cocaine. And then kind of before long, what you work out is there's something else that's going on here. This is not the only addiction, there's something else. So probably about 30 or 40% of the work I do is working with individuals and couples impacted by sex addiction.
Right. So let's discuss that word addiction. I've heard sex addiction referred to as an impulse control disorder, form of OCD, form of hypersexuality. It's not actually included in the DSM-5, which for those that don't know is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is sort of the Bible that the American Psychological Association puts out. Although the World Health Organization does have a diagnosis in the ICD-11 called compulsive sexual behavior disorder. And there's some that even say there's sort of it's kind of a camp, I guess you want to call it, that say there's no such thing as porn and sex addiction, and it doesn't have the similarities or characteristics to things like alcohol and cocaine addiction. So what do you think of that? Let's just address that a little bit, just so, because it's, especially for the lay person maybe watching this, it's kind of a confusing term, and a lot of people think, oh, it just means someone that has a lot of sex, and it doesn't actually mean that at all. So let's talk about that a bit.
Yeah, and you're right, Paulie. It's a fascinating debate, and we therapists get very kind of excited over, does it exist and doesn't exist, and it's really heated. And here's the way I look at it: that someone sits in front of me, and their life is a wreck because of their unhealthy relationship with sex.
I like the way you said that. I like the way you said that. Their unhealthy relationship to sex. Yes, that's important. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
And so for me, the label is the side issue, because if I go to the doctor, and it's helpful for me to understand what is it that I've got, but then the next thing I want to know is, well, what do I do about it? And so for me, I will look for certain characteristics that I think mirror, and there's a heck of a lot of research that shows these characteristics mirror all other addictions. So if someone is sitting in front of me and they say that as a result of my behaviors, and they'll describe their behaviors, I can't stop having sex or watching porn. I've tried to stop, but I've been unsuccessful.
Right.
I'm
usually more than once, right?
Absolutely. I told myself I'd stop. I got caught, or I didn't get caught. I set myself a thing. So usually
years, sometimes decades.
Yeah. I've. How long have you been trying this? Oh, for the last 15 years, and I did manage to stop for 6 months, so I can't be an addict. And so there's been this time where they tried to stop. Then they'll tell me about the negative consequences that have happened. So now I've spent X 100,000, for us it would be euros, for you it would be dollars, on prostitutes, on pornography. Obviously some of it's accessible, some of it's not, as in free. And so my relationship's a mess, my sex life's a mess. So already when you look at any definition of addiction, the preoccupation, the try to stop, it's compulsive, there's negative consequences, then as I say to this person, this may or may not be helpful to you to have a label. But for me, this compulsive sexual behavior, this unhealthy relationship with sex is causing you problems. And, to be really clear, I'm a therapist, I'm not the sex police. And I don't care how much sex you have. I don't care what type of sex you have. You want to.
We're not here to judge them. We're here because they're telling us that this is affecting them in a negative way, and they want to change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I've had clients say to me, when we've actually got to the point and we've said, okay, this you have an unhealthy relationship with sex. I'm going to call it sex addiction, or you can call it, compulsive hypersexuality. Call it what you want. But this is what I think is the issue here. And I've had a client come back to me and say to me, I've noticed on your website, and I kid you not, you're a certified sex addiction therapist. I think it suits you. You want me to be a sex addict because this is the work that you do. And so that's the power of denial. And I've just said, but you need to understand, I don't care about how, you're the one who sat in front of me and said, my wife has said, if I get caught one more time, she's leaving me and she's taking the kids.
Right. Well, so, it's funny you say that, because I've never called in 12 years. I've never called anyone a sex addict. I just asked them the questions and they answered. And I say, well, based on the answers you gave me, you seem to meet the criteria. What do you think of that? And then no one's ever, 90% of people, Gavin, they're like just relieved. They're like, oh, okay, now I know what's going on. And, we have all these clinicians that are like debating terminology, and that is important at the end of the day, but really clients don't really care what we call it. They just want to know what's going on. But yeah, I've never called anyone a sex addict. And then what do you think of this? Like, well, if we label them, we're shaming them or something. Like, I never got that, because that's certainly not what I do. I don't shame anyone or slap a label on them. Like, what do you think of that?
I completely agree with you. If we've set up the therapy space in a safe way, I'm like you, I'm not there to shame someone. If you imagine someone comes in and they say that they have an unhealthy relationship with a substance, maybe they're using too much Coke, I will often say to them, look, again, I'm not the Coke police. I don't care how much Coke you put up your nose. But if you tell me that this is causing you problems, then let's talk about it. So again, once that framework is set up and people understand that I'm not here to tell you how often to have sex, which has nothing to do with sex addiction. I'm not here to tell you what type of sex you should or shouldn't have, because firstly, who am I to say? And that's got nothing to do with sex addiction. I'm here to understand your relationship with sex in the same way as it might be understand your relationship with alcohol, with substances. I just want to understand your relationship with it. That's what we're here to do. And I want you to be free of these negative consequences.
Yeah. And I don't know what it's like in the UK, Monaco is kind of its own little thing, but the UK, but in Canada, I don't know of a single graduate school program that actually teaches anything about compulsive sexual behaviors, right? So we're the therapist community is very uninformed here. And I don't know if you've ever heard stories like this, but I have. So for the average therapist, through no fault of their own, generally speaking, because they've never learned about it, there's not even a conceptualization of something like a compulsive sexual behavior disorder. So I've heard lots of stories of couples that go in and, she's in tears and she's like, he'd rather watch porn than have sex with me. And I'm, catching him looking at, on his phone, and therapists say things like, well, it's pretty normal for guys to do that, and maybe you could just watch it together, and this is harming clients and re-traumatizing partners. So I have, I guess, part of one of my, goals, like I do trainings on this for therapists, but I really want to, sort of bring an awareness to this in Canada, at least, of, that this is something that we need to be aware of, because there's a lot of bad clinical practices being done, not maliciously, but just through not understanding. And they don't even ask in an intake about a guy's porn use. And I think it should just be right up there with, drinking, drugs, gaming, gambling, porn. It should just be part of an intake. So do you hear stories like that? Like, what do you think of that? Like, I don't know what it's like in the UK or Monaco, but in Canada, that's sort of the scene.
Pretty much the same. I did a 4 years master's, my first degree in psychotherapy. So I did a 4-year master's, and in that with one of probably the best schools in the UK. In fact, I now sit on their board, and we were never taught about compulsive sexual behaviors.
Wow. Yeah.
And I will tell you something else. The reason why I then years later went on and became what you would call a sexologist, but just to study sex therapy, is how can you and I do the work we do and not have a detailed knowledge of psychosexual issues, including compulsive sexual behaviors? And even if you don't want to specialize as a psychosexual therapist, sex is in the room with us all the time, whether I'm single, whether I'm gay, whether I'm straight, my relationship to sex is fundamental to who I am.
Yeah.
So I'm with you. I find it fascinating that therapists emerge into the world from all of the top schools, whether it's in Canada, whether it's in Europe, and there isn't this understanding. And like you, I went to Paris about 4 years ago to teach a group of therapists working with expats there who had never heard of and knew nothing about sex, porn, and love addiction. So you can only imagine, the same as you, the amount of clients who get misdiagnosed. And because and I'm sure we're going to talk about this, there's so much shame and fear around the whole topic of sex that you got to wonder what goes on in the therapy room with a unskilled, maybe very skilled in other areas, but when it comes to compulsive sexual behaviors, and you've got a betrayed spouse who is out of their mind trying to understand what is going on in their world.
Yeah.
And the therapist who's saying, like you just said, well, maybe you should watch more porn together, or I wonder why you feel uncomfortable about sex, or God knows what it is that's going on, and missing the trauma, the PTSD, whatever it is that's happening for a betrayed spouse.
And, I wonder, let's say, so you mentioned like you work with cocaine addicts. So let's say you were a cocaine addict, okay? And you used a lot of cocaine, and then you see cocaine addicts. So I wonder, how you're able to show up for that client dealing with that particular issue in a way that's actually clear-headed, and objective. And where I'm going with that is, let's say half of these therapists that these clients are going to love their porn, use porn all the time, have an addiction to porn, right? Because it's mystifying how hard it is to sort of make headway into just talking about it. Like, I mean, our culture, I'm just saying like our culture, but also you think mental health professionals would be, and I'm not knocking, like, I'm not trying to sound negative here, but like we'd be emotionally aware or a little more, open to things like that. But I don't find that's the case, and I've wondered about that too, if that's part of what's going on all the way. Because we know 50 to 75% of guys regularly watch porn. So that includes people that make the curriculum at schools, people that teach the curriculum at schools, the therapists that are graduating, right? I don't know what I'm trying to say there. I'm just sort of.
I think you make a really interesting point, which is, every guy, every person, every woman, every man, whoever it is, goes into this work, into the mental health field. We all take the same pledge. However, I'm sure it's written differently in Canada than Europe, but we want to do no harm. Mm-hmm. And so we have to have dealt with our own crap first. And so, it's a 4-year master's. And if you haven't dealt with your own stuff, you get held back a year. You're not ready to start, even obviously under supervision, to begin working with clients until we say, yeah, you've dealt with your own stuff. And at the same time, why are we not also asking about their relationship with porn and with sex? Because if it's going to get mixed in with the client stuff, then this isn't good. So I think what you're basically saying to me is, or specialists, I'm a CSAT. I forget now. Forgive me, Paul. Your qualification in the field.
Yeah.
Sorry.
American Association of Sex Addiction.
Okay. So basically, you and I have both spent a lot of time studying this. So if I have an unhealthy relationship with sex, I want to go and see a specialist and not a generalist. Mm-hmm. Or I heard someone describe it recently really well, which is just, if I have a problem with my heart, I'm not going to go to a foot doctor.
Right.
I'm going to go to a heart specialist.
Sure.
And I think, therefore, for recovering sex addicts and for their partners, one of the things, and because I often see people come in and say, I've been working with a therapist and I really like them. And I'll say, well, just ask them, because I don't want to pull anybody away. And you know this because it's how you and I met. I don't want to pull anybody away from their therapist. If you've got a good relationship, but please just ask them, what do they know about working with compulsive sexual behaviors? What do they know about working with betrayed partners? Because if they don't, then you need something else here. And that's a really hard message to deliver to someone who's working happily with their therapist, probably doing some good work. But if you want to recover from sex addiction, this is a very specialized type of work. And as you and I have been saying so far, not even therapists can exactly agree on the definition. So we need to make sure that our clients are getting the best possible treatment. I sound like I'm on my soapbox, but it's something I believe.
Oh, 100%. And I've also heard of couples that spend 6 months or a year in marriage counseling. Meanwhile, there's compulsive sexual behaviors going on the entire time. The therapist never even asked the question. So you think the guy's going to volunteer that he sees escorts and watches porn 3 days a week? Hell no. He just thinks, you know, my wife's happy, I'm going to couples counseling, and maybe they're still getting something out of that, right? You know, working on communicating. Wow, can't talk today. Communication issues and things like that. But you got this elephant in the room, you know.
Yeah. It's interesting you said that. Sorry to interrupt you. I had a couple reasons. I do intensive weekends for couples, and I do different types, but the most popular is what you just said. We want to work on communication, intimacy. So I saw them for an intake to make sure that they would be right. And there was sexual acting out behaviors. So they said, we would like to cover this too. He was still acting out, but he says less frequently. And my reply to them was, this isn't safe for me to do the work that you want. There needs to be some, and we'll talk about maybe what the work we do, but there needs to be a process whereby there is a disclosure as to what is going on. There needs to be a period where you, the person who is betraying your partner, you need to be in recovery. The partner needs some assistance. If I turn your chairs and say, now look and face each other and look lovingly into each other's eyes, and I'm going to teach you how to communicate, I said, I'm going to do more harm than good, because right now she wants to scratch his eyes out, which I absolutely get. I mean, she's not going to physically do it, but the emotion is there. It's not safe for me to do this work. So your point about couples going into couples counseling to do some nice intimacy building work, there's an addiction problem here first, and this needs to be dealt with before you do any of the lovey-dovey stuff that we can do.
Yeah, that's so awesome that you see that and have a protocol to actually, you know, address it right up front and not, because I think, you know, if you were to proceed, it's going to get derailed or sabotaged somehow, and then they're upset, you're upset, you look bad or whatever, and meanwhile this is, you know, just because maybe you never asked about that. So did he volunteer that, or did it come out in the intake, like the sexual acting out?
It came out in the intake because it was when I was asking about the history, and so then I said, and has the contact with the primary affair partner stopped? And I can't remember exactly what he said. He said it was a very addict response, something like mostly. And I said, so that's like being a little bit pregnant. And so for me, I said, I'm just thinking of your wife at the moment. This doesn't feel like, there's no trust.
No.
You're mostly now not being unfaithful to her. And I mean,
I shouldn't laugh. It's not funny, but it's just, you know, typical, like you say, it's such a typical response. And I have a word, one of my favorite words, Gavin, I use in the office is clarity. Sorry, I'm not clear. I need some clarity on the exact nature of your relationship with this person. Do you or do you not speak to them? Right? That's how I deal with it. It's like, what are we doing here, people? You know?
Yeah. And you know, so either the contact has stopped or it hasn't. Either you have cut contact or you haven't. So I know we digress slightly onto couples, but I think it's a really important point that I think what you're saying is it's astonishing how many therapists are out there who do not understand. I don't mean this in a kind of pompous way. It's just, there are lots of things there's lots of things I don't understand. So if someone comes to me and it's out of my field of expertise, the first thing I'm going to say is, look, this is really interesting, but actually I think you need to go and see a specialist. This is not my thing. This is not what I do. But I hope, God willing, I know what it is that I can't do.
Yeah. But let's hear some stories. You know, obviously they're shared in a, you know, maybe just generalize them. So it's obviously protecting confidentiality. What do you hear in your office? What do you know, for people that are like still not really quite clear on what exactly it is that we're dealing with? Can you share a few things with us?
Yeah, you know, I think on a broad level, I tell you what I see. I see people with just shattered dreams, you know, because nobody goes into, let's say it's a couple. Nobody goes into a relationship with the intention of hurting the other person. And so I see, you know, I see people in front of me with just their life in pieces. How did we get to this point? And so I see couples with shattered dreams. I see, if it's a sex addict, you know, pretty soon, if someone's ready to do the work, someone's motivated to do the work, I see someone who has so much shame and remorse, and I need to hold them long enough so that I can contain it, so the shame doesn't overwhelm them and they go back to acting out. And so if it's the sex addict, male or female, that's in front of me, I will sometimes say to their spouse, if I meet their spouse, I'll sometimes say, I promise you, your sex addict partner hates themselves as much, if not more than you hate them. So I see
so true.
Good people in front of me who are breaching their own moral standards and are going through hell.
Yeah.
Now, I understand it's not an excuse. I will say to every sex addict, you are responsible for your behaviors and there are consequences. So the misconception that what you and I do is a get out of jail card free, or it's oh, well, it's okay, you have an unhealthy relationship with sex. It's not okay. You have acted appallingly.
Yeah.
However,
yeah,
if the sex addict's in front of me, let's look at where it came from and how I can help you. So if it's the sex addict, I see someone with shame. I see someone with self-loathing. I see someone, if they're ready to do the work, kind of almost on the floor with, how on earth am I doing something? This is not me. If it's the betrayed partner I see in front of me, then, am I okay? You froze for a second, I got you back.
okay.
If it's the betrayed partner, it's just this, someone who's sitting in this deep fog of just, holy crap, has this really happened? And someone who doesn't know what's real and what's not real. And so that person in front of me, the betrayed spouse, could be someone who is so angry, could be irrational, could be swearing, they could be frozen, they could be numb. I mean, any of those fear type responses. And so that's what I see, if it's the addict, if it's the betrayed spouse, and if it's the couple. And it's just, you know, I feel for whichever one I'm actually, I'm going to rephrase it. It's not that I feel for whichever one I'm acting for. I can be acting for the sex addict, and at the same time, I will say, wow, your spouse has had it tough. He or she must really be, and then I want to make sure that they're getting their own support. So it's tough. I mean, I'm sure you see it all the time. I don't know what your experience is, but it's this shattered lives that have just been devastated by sex.
Yeah, and I have an intern with me, a student. So she's a 24-year-old young woman, and she sat in, and I warned her. I said, look, if you want to do your placement with me, you're going to hear the words pornography and masturbation more in 1 week than you've heard in your whole life put together. And she's like, no, okay, no problem. You know, she's great. She's mature for her age. But after sitting in on a lot of these clients, you know, she just said to me one day, she's like, Paul, like, these are just like ordinary guys. Like, they're good guys. Like, they, you know, they love their wives. They work hard. They love their kids. They pay their taxes. They coach baseball. Right. And I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much who they are. But, you know, it's shocking to someone like her coming into this. And you know, like, you can tell me if your clientele are any different, but I'll meet adults that have never gone 2 weeks in their entire adult life without masturbating to pornography. I talk with guys that will masturbate to pornography 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day. I've talked to guys that have slept with 50, 80, 100 or more partners, escorts, thousands of dollars on webcams, paying for sex, massage parlors, rub and tugs, or we call them here rub and tugs, escorts. So that's the behaviors. Like for people watching this that still aren't really clear about what we're talking about. That's what we're talking about. I talked to 23-year-old young men that have already watched 8,000 hours of pornography.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is real and this is serious, right?
Without doubt. And it's when you sit down with someone, it's not that, and you work out their history, their sexual history, what you and I would call maybe the acting out history, the addiction history. It didn't start like that. I mean, that's the other interesting thing. It's not that someone started out and day one they're watching this or they're seeing this number of prostitutes. It's like when you hold the mirror up to them in a way that's non-shaming, it's just like, and you take this inventory and you say, okay, so let me understand, you've spent this much, or you masturbate this many times. Again, it's that you need to help the client not disappear into this pit of shame, because they realize the extent to which, and this is why for me it looks like, I use the addiction model, whether we use the name, because it's escalated. Yes. It didn't start with this. It started with, I went on a business trip, I saw a prostitute, and then 6 months later, I did another one, and you trace.
Now it's every week.
Yeah, and what it was that I enjoyed, and I use that word carefully, because by the time they've reached our office, sometimes there's no enjoyment. It's just,
I use the term payoff. What was the payoff? Right.
Yeah, I love that. What was the payoff?
What did you get out of that? Right. And then they look at you funny, and I'm like, no, you did get something out of it. And there's always something that they got out of it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And isn't it interesting how, by the time, we meet them, the addiction, it's nothing to do with sex, is it? Or naked people. Right. Isn't that interesting?
And that's the part I think that the public, when you see it reported in the press, or when you talk to non-addict therapists, it's this sense of, it's just someone with a lack of impulse. It's someone having too much fun. And I almost want to say, you should see the people in my office, because sitting up all night, masturbating, and it's not even about the orgasm for some people. It's
the high, the euphoria.
It's the high. And the orgasm is just, okay, it's 5 a.m, I better go to sleep. Okay, let me just orgasm quickly. And that's not the purpose. The idea that I'm doing something now which is self-indulgent pleasure couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
Can I ask you, you said something really interesting. I can't remember how you phrased it, but it was something about loving their partners. And what do you say, because someone said to me recently, she said to me, but if he really loved me, he wouldn't have done these things.
Yeah, well, I hear that from every partner, and it makes complete sense, right?
Yeah.
But that's coming from a person, so I don't disagree and don't dispute that. I say I completely understand why you would say that, and then I try to explain how addiction actually works, how there's different parts of our brain, and I explain that this actually, I know you're not going to believe me, but this has nothing to do with you. It never was about you. And I teach partners the 3 C's, right? You didn't cause it, you can't cure it, you can't control it. I said, look at me. I say, look at me. It wouldn't matter who he was married to, he would have done this.
Yeah. I say something.
And then sometimes they start crying right there, right?
Yeah.
It would not, and he was already, the seeds were planted before you met him, right? But I say, the part of him that loves you is his prefrontal cortex that regulates emotion, and he does. But when you understand the cycle, and we're going to get into this in one of our questions, like the neurochemistry, when you understand the neurochemistry of addiction, when he's acting out, he's actually in an altered state where you actually, this is going to sound weird, you actually don't exist to him in that moment, in a way, right? And it is hard. They look at me like, what, but they do, as if they do the research and talk to other people, and like hopefully watch videos like this. Like I want this video to be there for partners too, to help partners understand this isn't about you. It never was about you, right? And yeah, there are people we meet that are sociopaths or malignant narcissists, and they probably don't love anybody. So again, it's not about you, because not only does he not love you, he doesn't love anybody, and he least of all doesn't, or most of all, doesn't love himself at all, right? But that's a different animal, right?
Yeah, I don't know about you. For me, most of the malignant narcissists don't come back very often into therapy. They may just start the process, but the moment you hold the mirror up, they're gone. And I don't therefore deal with that many, fortunately, because that's otherwise we'd have limited success with our clients. I don't work with that many narcissists because they don't want to do the work. But I concur with everything you say, and it's it's so moving to be part of this. And when you hear and that's when you sort of see the addict begin to sort of get in touch with their own emotions. And sometimes it's really hard because they've blocked off the empathy. And that's the thing that sometimes really throws the spouse. They're so disconnected from their emotions, which they also had to be to keep the addiction going. And it's started way before the relationship. And so the other thing I find that confuses the spouse is, but he doesn't seem to get it. And I'm like, it's a process. He does get it. But if he gets it all in one go, he's going to sink. And so the empathy, that lack of empathy sometimes I think really throws the spouse, but you chip away at it. And the thing you just reminded me of is one of the reasons why I think that the whole disclosure process is really important, because I think it can be really important for the spouse to hear the addict say, you know what, I started acting out when I was 14 years old. And it began then, and I've done X and Y for this number of years before we met, because it supports your point. This started way before you came on to the scene. And it's so important because it's just I don't know if relief is the right word, but it gives a context, I think, for the betrayed spouse.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and we know, you and I know 85% of them were sexually abused, and about 95 were neglected or emotionally abused. Like no one just grows up in a secure, loving, warm, intact home with secure attachment and just wakes up one day and goes, I think I'll just start jerking off to porn 3 hours a day and cheat on every girlfriend. Like no one does that, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think there's well, I'm going to say it because I intellectually think this is true, but I haven't seen it in my therapy, if I'm being honest. So there's this kind of school of thought that, we talk about the triple A's of porn addiction, that what's changed since probably, I think you and I are probably similar age, but when we're not recording,
I'll never tell.
No, when we're not recording, we'll talk about our age. But we talk about, porn is today, it's, it's accessible, and we say it's affordable, and it's anonymous. So therefore, it's possible that I had no childhood trauma, and I'm just playing with one of these things, and I suddenly get a blurred iPhone, and I suddenly and I get hooked on porn. But I have to tell you this: I don't think I've ever seen someone in my therapy room that hasn't had some kind of early neglect or abuse. So intellectually, I understand that there's potentially this generation of porn addicts that didn't have trauma. I don't know about you, but I don't see it.
Well, as soon as I said that to you, I then thought, hold on, because I think I have seen it, Gavin, and I'm starting to, and they're what we, like, I call them a biological addict. So we learn about, I don't know how CSATs learn this, but we kind of, break it down as there's like a psychological component, maybe there's a mood disorder, spiritual void, biological addict, trauma addict. And the trauma addict is, the ones that very narrowly, they act out in a very specific way that just mirrors the trauma, right? But Gavin, I am seeing guys that come from pretty good homes. There's no history of sexual abuse, but the reward center of their brain has been hijacked since they were 11 years old by the supernormal stimulus. And I am starting to see, and this would be in the younger people, Gavin, it's mostly biological, and it always bleeds into the psychological as well. Like we use it to escape or numb or comfort or self-medicate, but that's not really the main driving dynamic, I think, because once they really go through the withdrawal, and these are the guys that like, when they stop masturbating to porn, they like get the shakes, they like get headaches, like they have really strong physical and mental withdrawal because they've just been blasting. I tell people, like back in the day when we would get Playboy once a month, you get your dopamine hit, here's the eyedropper, right? Drop, drop, drop. Forget that. Now it's the fire hose, and so that's I think I am seeing that. As soon as I said that, I'm like, no, hold on. But not in the older ones. Like I'm talking like 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. It's sort of back to that, very high percentage of abuse and neglect. So, but I think we're seeing like a new type of clients sort of emerging out of this internet generation that's grown up with the black rectangle, right?
Yes, my clients are obviously too old, but no, I get it. I get what porn is doing. I haven't seen that many, but I certainly have seen in younger people these false beliefs as to what sex is and isn't, because they've been informed by what they've been watching, and maybe fortunately they haven't become compulsive, but the misinformation as to what they think their partners. I have seen young female clients who felt under enormous pressure to do certain sexual act because and I'm talking early 20s, I think. I'm just careful to anonymize, but what she felt was under immense duress. I never saw her partner. Her partner sounds like was a porn addict. So maybe I'm now contradicting myself, but he expected her to be doing the things that he was watching. Yeah. And I won't say in this forum what it was, but it surprised me. And she's like, so I don't know, because if I don't do them, I might lose him. Yeah. So whichever way you cut it, the unhealthy consequences of too much porn is, I guess we are seeing it. So I contradicted myself, not for the first time.
Yeah, it's okay. So let's just jump to another question. And this is a big one. We could talk for hours about this, but what's your Cole's Notes version of what causes people to develop compulsive sexual behaviors? And we can break it to nature, nurture, biopsychosocial, social, any way you want to cut it, Gavin. What's your 2-minute blurb on that?
I would say in most of the cases, I will see someone with some kind of early trauma. And when I say trauma, I hear obviously you reference sexual abuse, which of course I see. I think the thing that throws lots of clients is when there wasn't trauma with a capital T. So I think the thing that confuses lots of clients is, but nothing bad happened to me. There was food on the table. We went on vacation 3 times a year. Yeah. And when then I spend a bit of time with them, what we discover is that, dad was an alcoholic or a workaholic, didn't have that much time for me, but he was loving. Mum was, had some depression, or I'm one of 5 siblings. And so little Johnny or little Mary growing up didn't get their needs met. Sure. And kids are egocentric. So when we don't get our needs met, you're talking about the prefrontal cortex, the part of my brain that now I can, as an adult, I can say, mom and dad did their best. There were 4 other siblings, 5 other siblings. Dad was trying to provide. I get all that as an adult, but that part of my brain's not online when I'm 7 years old and I don't have consistent parenting.
Mhm.
So when I explain, therefore, to those people that there has been some neglect, there are some attachment wounds. So whether it's from neglect, whether it's from abandonment, then of course I see abuse, I see betrayal, and of course the cases are more severe. So yes, I got addicts where there has been addiction in the family. So for sure, I see that. But if I really had to, give you the summary, for me, I'm seeing childhood trauma, whether it's with the small or the capital T.
Mhm.
And sometimes what then gets layered on is, what did you learn about sex growing up? So why then it becomes interesting. I wonder why it was sex and why it's not cocaine or not alcohol. And very often there'll be an intersection of something. So for example, I saw someone recently and he was very badly neglected and lots of emotional abuse, never physical abuse, but lots of emotional abuse. And most of this happened from about the age of kind of 8 onwards. And that's also the age where he remembers discovering his dad's pornographic DVDs.
Right.
At a time when his brain is developing, he's very impressionable, he discovers something that distracts him from his pain.
Right.
And he becomes more and more interested.
Yes.
And more, his life becomes more and more compartmentalized and separate.
Yes.
And of course, he has immense shame because he's a young boy who knows that he shouldn't be looking at this, and I use the quotation marks, he shouldn't be looking at this type of stuff. So it's almost like the classic setup that there's an attachment wound. It's an age where he becomes exposed to something sexual. That something sexual is very soothing and distracting, and boom, he's set up as a sex addict.
Yeah.
Now, I'm just going to add a different scenario.
Sure.
So I also work with a female sex addict who basically her parents were just complete abandonment. She was left to her own devices. And so she felt terribly abandoned and very alone. Yes. And she remembers her escape is that she would go into her room, and that's when she started to masturbate. Sure. And that was how she would escape, and she would go into a little fantasy world. She also had lots of dolls and play friends, pretend friends. But the way she really escaped was doing something pleasurable and sexual, which was self-soothing. Mm. And so you can then see for her how this got set up. This was the way to escape, which for me is why I think about this more as an addiction model rather than an impulse or a kind of OCD. This is something that people in pain do to escape. So it was a long-winded answer to your question, but that is, if I had to summarize the scenarios that I see most frequently.
Yeah. Sometimes I hear that addicts, I usually hear this from partners, and I understand why they ask this question, but they're just hiding behind the label of sex addiction as an excuse. Well, I can't help it. I'm a sex addict. What's your response to that?
My response is that they may be, and then we'll call them out on it.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Because if you're using it as, and I think, look, there's something really that is quite worrying, which is people who I think are sexual offenders, which I don't think is the same as sex addicts.
I don't really work with those clients myself.
And I don't either. So when we think of, certain celebrities where you look and you think, what's given you pleasure is to cause the other person harm. Mm-hmm. That's not what a typical sex addict is interested in doing. They're interested in self-soothing and escaping, and they don't want to actually consciously harm somebody. Right. That's not how they're getting off on harming someone. Yeah. So yes, I think there are people who want to say, oh, I'm a sex addict. But as I said at the beginning of our session, okay, well, there are consequences. So if the wife, let's say it's the wife, and she says, but he's acting like a complete shit, excuse my language. And I'll say, yeah, sounds like he has.
Mhm.
He's done things to you that have caused you harm. And if I were in your shoes, I'd be saying what you're saying. So if someone's in front of me thinking that I'm going to give them a free ride because they now have a shiny label, they're wrong. I'll empathize with them, but I'll call them out on it if I think they're hiding behind something.
Yeah, and it's funny because you never hear people say that about alcoholics. Oh, he's just right. Like I don't really hear people. Oh, well, you're just saying you're an alcoholic so that you can make excuses for your behavior. But even if you identify as an alcoholic and you're going to a 12-step program, they're going to be holding you accountable. Trust me. Like those guys that have been in AA for 20 years, they're going to sniff out bullshit pretty quick. And they are going to hold you accountable. And what I say to both partners and addicts is like, listen, this isn't a free ride, okay? It's just more of an explanation. It's not an excuse. And they're two different things, right? It's like anyone that breaks the law and commits a crime, there's a reason that they do it. But they still have to pay the consequences, right? Like maybe a guy's driving 40 kilometers over the limit because he's late for work for the third time that week and he'll be fired. So there's a reason. It sort of makes sense too, but he's still going to get pulled over and get a ticket. So and I think kind of both, you know.
I agree, and it's the part I think is difficult sometimes for the spouse because there's this perception that, let's say now it's the female, because I'm always saying it's the male. Let's say it's the female who was the sex addict and done the betraying. But she got away with it. I'm the one here that's suffering, and I think it's helping both of them understand that you're both in crisis. But I think to begin with, it's really difficult if you've been betrayed. It's like, well, she gets to have all this new fancy language, and she's in recovery, and she makes all of her phone calls, and I'm so happy for her that she's now discovered.
What about me, though? What about me?
Right. What about me? Can she not see? Can they not see my pain? And so that's what I think makes it looks like the addicts got away with it because they get to go to therapy. And I think that's really hard.
That is hard. Yeah, it is. Okay, let's switch gears a little bit, Gavin, and talk about the neurochemistry of addiction, and especially sex and porn addiction. This really helped me, just as a therapist, because there's been so much good research in the last, I'll say 10 years or so, on this. And it helped me a lot, in my recovery, just understanding. I used to use porn as well, and I'm sober 16 years, but I couldn't understand my behavior because I didn't even know what dopamine was. I'd never heard of it. I didn't know what an altered state was. I didn't understand neuroplasticity and all of that stuff. So let's talk about, I guess, maybe in a general sense, the role of brain chemistry, and how do you work that into your work with the addicts, or even the partners too, but especially the addicts, to help make sense. Because I find when I explain this to guys, it also kind of takes some of the shame out of it. They're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Like, I had all the good intentions in the world when I was home alone that night to not act out. And then these thoughts just kept popping up in my head, which is, I call that euphoric recall, which is the synapses just firing off randomly. And then I told myself the lie, it'll just be 5 minutes. And next thing I know, it's like I woke up out of a stupor of 4 hours of masturbating to porn, right? So what's your approach with that? What's your take on that?
So I usually say, and it's you just, I think, alluded to it before about when we were talking about something, I forget the exact phrase you used about the prefrontal cortex being offline, or maybe I said it. It's that part where, someone says, you watch the celebrity on television and they've done something absolutely ridiculous. And we're sitting there thinking, what were they thinking?
Yeah.
And the answer is they weren't.
They weren't. Yeah, exactly.
They weren't. I mean, what was, by the way, I'm going to use Bill Clinton as an example. I have no idea, not my client. I have no idea if he is or was an addict, but just going to use it as an example. You know, the most powerful leader in the world is sitting in the White House, in the Oval Office, doing something very dumb. This is what addiction looks like. I don't know. I know nothing about his history, but you'd be forgiven for saying, what was he thinking?
Yeah.
And the answer is probably he's having such a dopamine rush that his ability to access the thinking part of his brain is gone.
Yeah.
So I'll say to clients, if I go for a walk, I'm looking at my view out the window here and I see the sea, and I go for a walk along the beach and the sea, I'm going to get a dopamine rush. And I'm going to, actually, I rephrase it, dopamine will be released, which is that chemical that says this is pleasurable. Mm-hmm. It reminds me from the last time I did it that I enjoy it and I want to repeat it. Mm-hmm. If tonight, instead of going for a walk along the beach, I decide to watch some porn, it's your fire extinguisher point, or your, what did you call it? The hose.
The fire hose?
Fire hose. Yeah. So instead of getting some dopamine released, probably about 100 times more dopamine will be released from watching the porn.
Yes.
And so if I keep doing it, after a while, my brain is going to stop producing the natural dopamine, because it's my brain is saying, give me the other stuff, give me the good stuff. So what I discover is that walking along the beach is not even pleasurable anymore. Right. And therefore I'm dependent on watching the porn to get my hits. Yeah. And a bit like we were saying earlier on, after a while, I'm going to need to turn up the dopamine because my brain gets used to it. So that little bit, the 20 minutes of vanilla porn is not hitting the spot anymore. So it needs to be 4 to 5 minutes and maybe some porn that's a bit edgier. Yeah. And your phrase, altered state, when I'm in that altered state, and let's talk about when it actually starts, but let's just say when I'm in that altered state, I've got no recollection that the kids are next door, that I'm married, that there's my job. I'm in that space and I do not know what's going on because I haven't got access, to that part of my brain anymore. We can call it the amygdala hijack. We can find all the different phrases for it, but basically that's the simple way I look at it. And the preoccupation, the definition that we were talking about at the start, I could be now sat here and I'm doing this session with you. And actually what I'm thinking is how quick we end this session, because tonight I'm alone in the house and I can watch porn. I'm already starting to get high thinking about it. Yeah. I'm not even watching porn. I'm in a session with you. Yeah. But because I know that I have the house to myself and I can watch porn, I'm beginning to get distracted. I'm not answering your questions. And then I'm going to end the session quickly. And you can see the negative consequences. Yeah.
Well, I have this board. You can sort of see it's a whiteboard.
Yeah.
And that's the cycle, right? And it's just one like everyone, you have your version probably of it too. It's just one I sort of came up with, but I was listening to it must have been a podcast or something, and they were talking about the release of the dopamine, and this was really fascinating to me. You just made me think of it. So I have like trigger, euphoric recall, thought distortion, anticipatory excitement, altered state, acting out. But what's really interesting is, when the dopamine levels are the highest in the anticipation, not in the acting out, not in the acting out. That's really interesting. Yeah. So I tell guys, I tell people when they're looking at that, I say the goal, like in terms of managing your brain, is never get to the anticipatory excitement, because it's game over. It's like the rock's over the edge of the hill. Okay. You can't, it's a point of no return, right? Yeah. But I found that so interesting, because I thought, well, the dopamine's probably the highest 10 minutes into the porn session. No, it's not. Yeah. And there's a great, sorry to cut you off. There's a great podcast for anyone watching Huberman Lab. So Andrew Huberman's a neuroscientist, and he has a whole thing on dopamine. And he says dopamine, and I didn't know this either. We all learned like it mediates reward, but that's actually its secondary function. Its primary function is the pursuit of a goal. And he says it trenches your brain. So I thought immediately of this scene in Star Wars where they're flying down the trench of the Death Star, you know, and they have to launch a torpedo through that specific small opening. And when like there's scenes where they're flying, like everyone else there's this huge battle waging around them, right? But they're completely unaware of it because they're just trenched focused, right? And they're going and going, and you can just feel that building and building, and they have to get it just right, and there's people blowing up all around them and shooting, but they're just, you remember that scene?
I have to make a confession.
You've never seen Star Wars?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, 90% of the people watching this will have seen it, so they'll know what I mean, but
you explained it very well, and I had forgotten that. I had learned at some point the pursuit of a goal, and I had forgotten that being the primary phase. And so, and it's why, you know, you and I do so much work with addicts on the triggers, because we need to catch what is it, what was the moment when you started thinking, what state were you in? Was it the fact that I gave an example of unstructured time, I'm home alone tonight, or was an argument with your spouse? What was it that started, so that if we can begin to see what the triggers are, we can, you know, catch you before you become preoccupied. But it's it's tough.
Yeah, I find it so empowering for clients to know the whole cycle, like to understand themselves. And I tell them, I say, every single time you act out, you go through these steps. There's no exception. Every single time. It's very predictable, right? So we can hack that cycle if you learn how. So let's talk about your approach, and just like, what's your approach in helping people, your treatment model, or like, if, you know, do you have like 4 pillars of recovery or 5 pillars of recovery or that sort of thing? Let's just talk about that a little bit, Gavin.
I send them to you. That's my approach.
Okay, well, besides that.
You know, the first thing I would usually say to someone is, how about, are you happy to agree a period of sobriety with me? In other words, can you agree to stop the unhealthy behaviors? And does it, I'm not sure, or for how long. And I'll usually start off and say, well, how about just for 30 days? Let's pause so that we can just see what's going on. I want to understand what happens when you stop watching porn, or when you stop masturbating or using the prostitutes. And inevitably, it's going to be harder for some people. And that's okay. I'm not in the shaming business. I'm okay with someone coming back the following week and saying, I saw you on Monday and I got till Friday. Okay. Firstly, well done.
Yeah, at least
well done getting from Monday to Friday. How did you manage that? Yeah. What happened on Friday? And so we kind of just begin to explore a little bit about, I wonder what's happening for you physiologically, mentally, biologically, what's going on in this period. And it also gives us a chance to look, because we've assumed, I use the term, you know, sex addiction, but, you know, there may be something else going on here. There may be other mental disorders that we want to understand. So the first thing for me is, okay, let's pause. And then I'm usually giving someone what I call a bit of a kind of toolkit too. I'll come up with, now that you've stopped and we're beginning to understand what got you started, let's look at some of the triggers. What are the things that you really don't want to be doing? So what you and I might call bottom lines. Let's understand what are the absolute no-nos. And let's look at the gray areas. What are the things that get you? Because sometimes everyone knows, okay, I don't want to have sex outside my relationship. Okay, that's really simple. what happens though? How do you get to the point where, given that's what you don't want to do, what happened? What happened on Friday? Well, I was going on social media, and social media took me, and then I got aroused. Okay, so shall we then, let's have a discussion about social media. Would you be happy to say that you need to limit your social media? Because in principle, there's nothing wrong with you looking at a pretty woman on social media, but that's what got you into trouble, because that took you somewhere else. So for me, I'm in those early stages trying to give someone a practical toolkit. I'm not really doing deep trauma work.
No.
Because it's too soon and I'm going to lose the person. And also, if my coping mechanism is I use sex to manage difficult emotions, and I charge straight in and say, let's talk about the attachment wounds when your mother died when you were age 7. Let's talk about that. I'm gonna make somebody more anxious. So for me, I'm parking the deep trauma work, and I'm saying, let's just have a look at what happens when you stop acting out. Let's have a look how you can prevent yourself doing it. And I'll give you a little toolkit to help you do that. And I'll also talk to them about, would you look at going into some 12-step group, doing some group work? So that's kind of where I start. It's sort of a little bit of a CBT flavor. It's helping someone identify what it is, what's my pattern, what happens for me just before I start to act out, and then psychoeducational work, as you just said, because I want to understand. It's like when I go to the doctor, help me understand what those words mean. When you say I've got blah, 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 what does that mean? What's the prognosis? What is it? That's what I'm doing early on.
Yeah. Is there any resources or books that you like to refer?
I use the Patrick Carnes Facing the Shadow quite a lot, because there are some good exercises in there about helping someone work through the denial. Because even though someone's in my office, they still might be saying, look, I know I've got a problem here, but you should see my friend Fred. He's really bad. You should see what he spends on prostitutes. Or I do this because I work really hard. And so helping them understand, getting that point, which in 12 steps, we might say, I am powerless over this.
Right.
This is unmanageable. Yeah. So sometimes I'll take some exercises from Facing the Shadow. Sometimes I'll ask them to read some work from Rob Weiss has his Sex Addiction 101.
I like that book. I refer that one a lot.
I really like it. I think it's well written. I think Rob writes with such clarity, helping them just begin to understand. Because if I can understand it, I don't feel so shameful. I understand that what I'm going through, hundreds, thousands, whatever people are going through this and have gone through this. And then it gives me hope, and the shame moves from shame to hope.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Is accountability a big part of it, or like, do they generally find that through their participation in a group, like whether it's checking in daily or getting a sponsor or that sort of thing? Or
yes, I think getting a sponsor, I think, is really important. And because for me, I don't want to become the accountability partner. I don't know how you feel about it. So if I ask someone, I say, are you happy to agree not to have sex for 30 days or 60 days, 90 days, whatever we agree? And I'll say, but I want you to know you're making the contract with yourself. I'm not going to judge you, and I don't need to be your accountability partner. I just want to be able to talk to you about what's happened between when I saw you last and today. So yes, I think it's important. I think it's important that they go to and at least try the 12-step meetings. Try the no fap on it if no fap. But just try the different group, but being in a group of some kind, I think is really important. And I will often say to a sex addict, you and me doing this once or twice a week, this is not enough.
Right.
And now that COVID hopefully I hope we're over the worst, I would really like you to do some face-to-face meetings and not just online, because the connection is so important.
100%. Yeah, do you encourage a period of total abstinence? So we call that no PMO. So no porn, no masturbation, no orgasm. And because I know Carnes talks about 30, 60, 90 days. Like, is that sort of a standard protocol? Or because understandably, most guys aren't doing backflips and dancing around. You suggest that?
Yeah.
Do you recommend that or use that?
Yeah, I do it. And, you know, the research, as I understand, is quite mixed as to whether it really does or doesn't reset the brain. And so I can't,
Wow.
yeah,
Hmm.
I don't know. I'd be interested to know your view on it. For me, it's because I want to understand what happens for you when you stop.
Yeah,
And I also know that we can, sorry to interrupt you, I know that we can build new neural pathways.
yeah.
I know that if I start walking along the beach again, I can begin to enjoy it. And I can begin to enjoy other things in life. So I believe in the neuroscience about building new neural pathways. I don't know whether or not what happens to the brain. I'd be interested to know your view after 30 days specifically, or 60 days. But I do know that when clients stop, we learn so much about them and their behavior, even if it's just understanding the withdrawal.
Yeah, that's kind of the purpose for suggesting that is more because I'm not familiar with all the research on the reset or the reboot as we call it, but I'm more interested in the what's it like for you, because this brings out the relationship to sex more, especially the entitlement, right? Because there's addicts are they're so entitled to, they have this idea like, I deserve an orgasm instantly, on demand, whenever I want it, anywhere, anytime I can get to my phone. It's like, no, human beings have never lived this way ever. Okay. And but my mentor Doug Weiss told me one time, you can give people information or you can give them an experience, right? And so it's like fasting from food, right? Like I can't really explain to you, if you don't eat anything for 3 days, how on day 4 your whole relationship to food shifts. You lose interest in it. You're not hungry. You don't care about food. It's hard to understand. But if you go do it, then you're like, oh, okay, right? So that's sort of, and I'll tell you, most guys don't. I got a couple of clients now doing it, okay? But a lot of guys aren't real happy about it. But I don't think I've ever had anyone do it and go like, oh, there was no point in doing that. Like there always seems to be some insight, right? Do you find that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because they're learning, it's, as you say, they're learning about the experience, and I'm learning with them. And it's not, I'm less interested in, as I said before, whether there's been a slip or not, because that to me is all part of recovery. And if I've been watching porn for the last 15 years, it's not a switch. Just because I'm now seeing a therapist, oh, I've now stopped. You're going to struggle with stopping and starting and wanting to do it, and all of it is part of the recovery process. So, as long as you show up in the therapy room and you're honest, because you're cheating yourself, not cheating me. And I think, I don't know about you, but unfortunately, a lot of addicts, because there's so much shame, 3-6 months into the work, they'll say, there's one thing I didn't tell you. I did contact my affair partner again, and I just didn't know how to tell you. And so it's part of the recovery process. And I said, okay, let's talk about it.
Yeah. Let's talk about partners a bit. So I don't know if maybe you can tell me what percentage of the time you see both of them. Like I'm a little different. I get most therapists, I guess, don't do this, but I will work with both. So if they come to me as a couple, I'll see them as a couple, then work mostly with him individually, bring her in from time to time. Or sometimes do more couple sessions as well. Sometimes I'll see her separately. So I'm curious of how you work with couples, and also just some things that you can pass on to partners that are watching this, going through some really terrible trauma over all of this, and what would your words be to them as their whole world has been devastated?
So I think it's interesting. I think your approach is interesting, and I will work with either the addict or the betrayed spouse, but inevitably there will be some sessions when I will want to see the other person with them, because if you take, I'm working with someone at the moment, and I'm working with the addict, and he is doing a check-in, which I think with his wife is causing them more problems. She doesn't have a CSAT. So she wants to know when he does his daily check-in. I want to know, did you find anybody attractive today? I want to know whether you fantasized, and I want to know whether or not. So this is their check-in, and no matter what I do, I've only got him in the room. Right. So I will usually say, do you know what? I would love to have a session. Can I have your permission? How do you feel about it? And can I have your permission to contact your spouse? Because I think it would be really helpful if we can have some time together, because I'm very conscious that the spouse has no idea what's going on in the therapy room. I'm doing these check-ins, which are, from her point of view, if it's her, these are safety-seeking behaviors, which is, I want to, I just want to feel safe. I just want to feel safe. But ultimately, this isn't helping you both. So I will usually call in the partner and have some sessions. I say, look, can I come up with a recommendation that I think will support you both? This is stuff I think is going to benefit you both when you do your check-ins, etc. So yes, I will see. I will usually want to see both parts of the couple if it's a couple. I won't work with them on a long-term basis, but I will want to see both parts. Point, about working with spouses, I think I just want to give them some kind of normality. I think I just want to say that I will do some psychoeducational work about what PTSD looks like, and say, does any of this, do you ever get obsessional? Do you ever get depressed? Do you ever have flashbacks? Do you ever get anger? And it's just like, yeah, I do. I'm like, okay, well, this is part of a trauma response. And so I just want to tell you that everything you're going through as a therapist makes sense to me. I understand that your partner doesn't get it, and he thinks that just as you're making progress, I mean, I hear this a lot, we're just making progress, we go out for a nice dinner, and at the end of the dinner, she throws the wine in his face, and he's just like, what happened? I'm like, well, what happened is she got triggered, and just as she's beginning to let her guard down, she suddenly remembers the last time she did that, you crapped on her, excuse my language. So therefore, this is part of the roller coaster. So with the spouses, I often just first want to be able to say, this is what gaslighting looks like. So there's a reason you don't know who to trust, and you don't know that, when he told me on our anniversary 2 years ago, and he said, I love you, did he mean that, or was he thinking of her? So I just want them to understand that your world has been turned upside down, and I understand the confusion and that nothing makes sense, and then help the betrayed spouse get some support also, so that they don't have to feel the shame, so that they know that there are other people out there. But I think it's this, I think for the betrayed spouse, it's this feeling of, I'm just going to go crazy. My world, nothing makes sense anymore.
Yeah. Do you take couples through the formal disclosure process?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I do. It's not for every couple, but generally I will do, because I think in order for the trust to start, I think it's really important that the betrayed spouse is, I want to know everything, because before I can move forward, what are we working with here? So, and addicts will, when they do their own disclosure, they do a lot of editing. Well, I'll tell her what I think she needs to know.
They trickle it out, and shade
that as well.
the truth a bit.
And exactly. And I won't actually say, it was my secretary, I'll say it was someone at work, and I won't. And actually, in order for me to move forward, I don't need to know the details of every sexual act, but I do need to know basic stuff like, when did this start? How long has it been going on for? How many partners have there been? How much money have you spent? In other words, I think I have an idea, but I don't know everything. And so I think for both parties, for me, and I'd be interested to know your view, I think it's really important that, okay, and pretty early on, let's get out there what's happened. And then I also want the betrayed spouse to have an opportunity to reflect. And at some point, I want you now to respond. I want you to tell the addict, what's it like to have been you for the last 15 years? Now that you've heard what you've heard, he needs to hear what you've gone through. I mean, do you do that? I mean, for me, it's a very important part of not for every couple, but I find more often than not, it's something that's beneficial to both parties.
Yeah, well, I really, and I want to ask you I want to ask you one more question first. What do you do when the addict refuses to do a formal disclosure? Do you keep working with him knowing that he's most likely withholding information from his partner?
It's a good question. If I really think he's withholding information, I will challenge him. And inevitably, if I challenge too much, we'll reach an impasse, which is either that I'll do it or they'll drop out of therapy.
Yeah.
And, it's your recovery. And that's what I'll say to someone. So it's, again, go back to my example. You go to the doctor and heaven forbid they say you've got cancer. And they'll say, look, here's the treatment I'm recommending. Let's say they say you need to do chemotherapy. I know it's not the best example because you don't have to do, but let's just say that that's what the doctor says. You can choose to take the doctor's advice or not, but there's no point in coming back here each week and pay me the money you're paying me if you're going to withhold information from your spouse. Yeah. So it will usually come to a conclusion one way or the other, but I won't go on indefinitely because I know that I've got one hand tied behind my back and I'm being set up for failure.
Yeah, that's kind of my experience as well.
Can I ask you a question? But the thing that I have come across recently, the addict wants to do the disclosure, but the spouse doesn't want to hear it.
Yeah, I come across that too. So, I have mixed feelings about that because we want to respect the partner, like where she's at emotionally. And there are certain situations where a disclosure is not appropriate. Let's say the partner has a history of severe mental illness, if they're a bipolar, unmedicated bipolar, or a history of psychotic, that they're not, that you need to have a relative degree of emotional stability, I think, to go through something that's going to be that basically traumatic, right?
Yeah.
So there's definitely times where it's not recommended. But I always find that interesting because part of me goes like, no, like I really get why you don't want to hear this, but part of me really thinks you need to hear this. And there's a difference between what we want and what we need, right? And we think we need what we want, but I don't think that's always true. But who am I to speak for her? So all I do is explain it the best I can. And, I go through a bit of a process as well, where there's the formal disclosure that I do ideally with them, or, I have a colleague that coaches partners. So sometimes it's the four of us will all do it, whether it's by Zoom or in person. And then we invite the partner back to what you said, like, what's it like being you? So she writes what we call the emotional impact statement. So she goes through, your addiction affected me as a woman, as a wife, as a sexual being, as a mother, as a professional, mental health, my physical body, and she goes through all of those things. And I find that's very powerful for both of them. And we talked earlier how the addict, especially when they're in just entering therapy, but even 6 months into therapy are very, very disconnected from the emotional impact on the partner. And sometimes they're so consumed with their own shame and guilt. And even the guys that are like doing everything right and working the recovery 100%, they're consumed with that. Right.
Yeah.
So this emotional impacts, I mean, I've seen guys break down and cry, and we had to stop for 10 minutes while they pulled themselves together because he'd never, ever got it before. It never clicked. Right. So we go disclosure, emotional impact, then he can write an amends letter where he takes what she said and specifically apologizes. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
And then we have that. And I use a polygraph as well. So if the partner still doesn't believe him, we do a polygraph.
Yeah, it's very similar. And I really want to endorse what you said, which is about this process, because, I was saying before about the spouse doesn't quite get why doesn't he get what I've gone through? Why does he not have the empathy? And it's usually, if that is the case, after the impact letter, that's when he actually is able to step in her shoes and understand what's happening. And that's sometimes the very thing that he's been fighting. I don't want to actually face the damage I've done, the hurt I've done.
Yeah.
And that's part of the recovery process, and which is why you and I both agree there is no get out of jail card free here. You need to experience. I'll support you, and I understand why you got to this point. But part of this process is you need to experience the reality of your life and what you've caused your partner. And when she sees that you get it, that's when the trust starts.
Exactly.
Because until she knows all of this, which you think is madness, the checking your phone and your messages and these crazy check-ins, she's just wanting to feel safe.
Yeah, safety speaking.
She doesn't know what's real and what's real. And right now, you look like the cat that got the cream. There's no consequences. Like we said before, you get to go to your fancy therapy. Maybe you did an intensive, and now you've discovered your higher power, and you've got all this, like, well, good for you.
Almost resentful though of him, right? Yeah.
Exactly. I'm on the floor, and you've now got, you've discovered yourself.
Yeah.
Well, so it's this parallel journey that addicts and spouses, they're not on the same timeline. Right. And when you do that process, for me, that's when the timelines begin to merge. But often it's not until the amends letter or the impact letter that both of them are, okay, we're now on the same timeline.
Yeah. Well, I tell couples there's 3 recoveries, his, hers, and the marriage or the relationship, right?
Yeah.
And they are on different timelines. So yeah, okay. What's people ask me this all the time, what's your success rate? So do you know what your success rate is, and how do you define success?
And I'll tell them I have no idea.
No idea.
But I'll tell you why I say that, because I want to know what you mean by what is recovery and what is success.
Yeah.
Because yes, I can send you the research on how many people are recovering from 12 steps, etc. Here's what I will tell you is that 2 people who are committed to this process, in my experience, get where they want to get to. That I can tell you. And if you're motivated, but what I will also tell you is that there are bumps in the road. And if the bump in the road means it's not successful, it's too black and white, because for me, recovery is a lifelong process. Yes. And so there will be slips and there will be relapses along the way. Doesn't mean every single case, but just generally. So for me, it's a journey. And so I don't like this. I'd be love to know your answer, but I don't collect stats. I don't keep stats because I don't know how to measure it, because a partner could tell me, well, he's been seeing you for 6 months and now he just watched porn yesterday, he's failed. And I'm like, that to me is he's had a slip, but you've already told me that the intimacy is starting to come back, that you're starting to discover something that wasn't there before. That hasn't gone away.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't know the research on that, and I think I think part of the and it may be out there, I don't know, but the first thing I would want to know is what are the parameters of recovery, right? So, when I have the time one day, Gavin, I'm gonna like go through my files and see, what for me the success rate is, and I'm just off the top of my head, I want to say 1 year after starting recovery, there's been 3 or less slips on bottom line behaviors, um, something like that. And consistency in going to group and therapy, and some kind of observable change in the person's demeanor and personality and the way they, because recovery really changes people, it really does, to the point that they'll tell me 2 years later, like, I don't even know who that guy was. Like, looking back on myself, I don't know who that guy was. Like, that's how I feel about myself too, right? But I'll say this though, I can't think of a couple that I have, or an addict I've worked with, that has done a full disclosure, passed a polygraph, done an impact statement and amends letter, that's not still together or sober.
Mhm.
I can't think of one. So that's 100%. But that's a small, because I just described like the ideal world, right? But the reality is, like, let's say we meet 10 couples, maybe 3 of them actually go through all those steps at the end of the day, because he won't do a disclosure, or he drops out, or she will never come and see me. Like, it's very common that I never ever meet the partner.
Yeah.
So I can't take her through that process, right?
And I think, yeah, and I like how you phrase it, because I'm thinking now about the people who have gone that far down the line, and I think I probably have a similar experience.
Yeah.
And I think what tends to happen is that for some addicts, it's a timing issue, and they come to see you, and you and I both know it because we've met these people, and they're not ready, and the motivation, it's not that the motivation, that's the wrong word for it. I think it's just, I can only put it, it's about timing. And that's why I will say to that addict, look, it's your recovery. I can't make you go to meetings. I mean, I had someone say to me recently that what you're asking me to do is, I was saying I would like them to go to a minimum of 3 meetings per week, at least try it for the first few months. And then if it's not for you, it's not for you. But this is what I'm proposing, and in my experience, alongside our work. And their response was, what you're asking me to do, I don't have the time to do. It would be very inconvenient, and it means I won't be able to do ABC. And I said, okay, it's your recovery.
You get out of it what you put into it, right?
Sorry?
Well, you get out of it what you put into it, really.
Absolutely.
Like anything else. Yeah.
So now it may be that we make it and we still get there and he gets what he wants in terms of sobriety, or it may be that he needs to fall further and he needs to come back in a year and 18 months time and say, I surrender because my way hasn't worked. I'm on the floor, I lost my wife, and tell me what to do and I'll do it.
Yeah.
And that's when we get to that point where whatever the medicine is, I just want it. There's a very high probability of success.
Yeah, I find that I describe that as the X factor is, I'll do whatever it takes to get sober. Like, when they're showing up with that mindset, there's a very, very high success rate. So a lot of it is to do with what they bring. Right?
The other thing, yeah, and the other thing that I just thought about was the person who comes in and says, I've come to see you because my partner told me to. And I'm like, okay, that's okay, but how do you feel about it? And I will say, because look, addicts learn to be very sneaky and very crafty. That's how they've managed to live a double life. And how do you feel about it? And at the end of the session, I'll say, you know what I think? I think you want to basically have your cake and eat it. You can go back home and say, I saw that therapist and I'm going to go back and see him. But you're going to keep seeing prostitutes when you go on your business trip. You and I both know that. So I want you to come and see me when you want to be here.
Yeah.
and not because your partner says to be here, because I don't feel comfortable doing this piece of work with you. And I'll be very direct, because I don't want to do a piece of work that I know from, I can't know. I have a strong belief it's going to fail. And so I'll name it.
I gotta ask you a question. So I'm just curious what you think. So a couple of years ago, I had a client come to me, and he was a sex addict, escorts and porn. I think daily porn, maybe multiple times a day for years. So we had a session, and then he emailed me after and said, I've decided I just want to stop the escorts, but keep the porn and masturbation. And my wife's, this is what he's saying, my wife's okay with that, right? And I really thought about that, right? And then I wrote him back and I said, I'm sorry, I don't think we're a good fit. I cannot ethically continue on a course of treatment that I believe will not be effective and will actually be a waste of your time and money. And I sense that you're trying to control the process, which addicts love to do. And what you're asking me is the equivalent of an alcoholic saying, I will give up the whiskey, but I want to keep drinking the beer.
Mm-hmm.
And then, there's a whole bunch of neurochemical reasons why it's just a non-starter. Okay. It's like an alcoholic saying, I'll quit the whiskey, but drink the beer. But you watching porn and masturbating is going to keep your brain in the exact same addictive cycle. The prostitutes are just an escalation of that. Plus, I don't actually believe you when you tell me that your wife's on board with all of this, right? So that's what I did. And he wrote back, he was pretty mad. He didn't like that. But what do you think?
I would have
honestly, like if you would have handled it differently, I really want to hear how you would have handled it.
I would have had it very similar. I would have said, would it be possible to meet with your wife? And I'd like to explain to you both why I think, this isn't going to work. But I would have said exactly the same thing, because ultimately we're talking about someone that intentionally or unintentionally is setting us up for a fall, and themselves. And at your point, ethically, I'm not going to do it. It's a little bit like someone coming in with multiple addictions.
Mm-hmm.
And I will, I want to keep an eye on that, because ultimately they're going to swap one addiction for another. And I'll say, you need to address the others as well here. Mm-hmm. I had a guy came in and was largely it was some prostitutes, but it was massages with happy endings. And his wife didn't know about any of it. And I did say, so he very, very similar said that he thought I was basically being like the sex police, and I was making a judgment about massages with happy endings, because that's what guys do. And he's not causing any harm, and he's happy to stop the prostitutes, but he doesn't think he has an unhealthy relationship with sex. And also, he doesn't do it that often. And we didn't really get far enough in our work, because he left, for me to know for sure the extent of his relationship with sex. But the point at which I lost him, on my part, either consciously or unconsciously, was when I said, well, I tell you what, let's get your wife in the room and let's ask her how she feels about massages with happy endings. And if she thinks they're okay, they're okay.
Right.
And in hindsight, it was probably...
Sorry, you froze.
That was my
froze,
intent.
Gavin. Sorry, say the last sentence again. You froze there.
Okay, I said in hindsight. Yeah, in hindsight, I think it was too challenging an intervention, and I think I probably shamed him, and that's not what I intended to do, and I regretted the intervention in that way. I think I could have phrased it in I'd be curious to know what your wife, but I think he got probably under my skin, and sometimes clients do, and I'm human, because what I wanted to just point out was the absurdity of a betrayal is a betrayal. A secret is a secret. Yeah. And if I'm texting my girlfriend and my partner doesn't know, my ex-girlfriend, that's a secret. So anything that you are not sharing, because as you and I know, there's a difference between my privacy and my secrecy. And
Mhm.
if you don't want your partner to know about this because
Mhm.
they wouldn't approve, you are doing something that is contravening your implied relationship contract. Full stop.
Yeah, yeah, love it. It's tricky sometimes though, like the situations that well, clients present us with. I'm like, we really do have the most interesting job in the world every day. And you really do want to, tread the line of ethical, responsible intervention and not shaming. And there's that party that just smells the denial and the manipulation as well. Cause like, well, we're humans and, I'm a recovering porn addict. So I know how they think. Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, buddy, that's not working on me. Are you kidding? What do you think you're talking to here?
Yeah.
I was like, no, do you even believe what you're saying right now? And they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
So it's yeah, it's tough. And you see people in, I think it's the fear for the addict that if I really face this is going to overwhelm me. I'm going to lose myself. And it's if I really let everything go. And then there's the fear of recovery of, but what if I change? What if I don't like the person I'll become? So I think there's this fear of, I know the old me, I know the old Gavin, and I know how he works and how he operates. But it's made me the person I am today. And if you take all that away from me, and so there's this fear of what I'm going to become.
mhm,
And I get it. And I absolutely understand. So let's just name it that there's fear.
mhm,
And at some point, as I said before, the fear becomes hope
mhm.
that I'm actually that person I was born to be, that I was capable of being. And I don't know who you're going to emerge to be. And yeah, maybe you will change careers. Maybe you will not want to be so motivated by money or by other stuff.
Mhm.
And that's why the groups are so important, because you look around a room and you see people who have achieved that sense of personal fulfillment and happiness. And you think, I want what she's got. I want that level of serenity. I
Mhm.
don't want to be chasing rainbows anymore. And then it becomes exciting because I'm starting to change and I start to like the person I become,
Yeah,
or I'm becoming. But there's that first part about, I don't really know if I can let all of this go.
yeah,
Because as you and I know, my primary relationship has not been with life, has not been with my partner. My primary relationship has been with sex.
yeah, yeah. Okay, let's touch on one more thing, and this has been great, Gavin. But we are coming up on 2 hours here, so I'm probably going to have to break this into two parts or something when I post it. But yeah, I just want to talk about in your practice, what role do mood disorders, especially bipolar and depression, uh, and personality disorders or other factors play into um, the presentation, I guess, of the client and their addiction. And you screen, like, you screen for that right up front. Is it sometimes something that becomes apparent as time goes on, like maybe this person is it narcissist or borderline personality disorder, or they have had untreated depression? So just talk about that a little bit.
So yeah, I think it's the point where I said, when someone early on and they stop their acting out, that for me, that 30, 60 days period is the time when I'm really doing that exploratory work with them,
Mm,
because I want to understand.
mm,
For example, I'm not a psychiatrist, but the moment I get a sense that, I don't know, I was reading recently about the medication for Parkinson's is going to make somebody much more hypersexual.
oh,
So, which I didn't know before.
no, me
That
neither.
was new to me. So, we're always learning. Our field is evolving. So I want to understand, and that's why I said at the right beginning of our session today, someone's relationship with sex, because it might be part of a manic episode. It might be part of their bipolar behaviors.
Yes.
And in which case, I'm probably then going to also be working with their psychiatrist, or I might refer them to a psychiatrist, just so that we then are working more as a team, just because I want to have a framework for where does the sexually acting out behaviors sit. So I think it's really important that we in our field understand that there may be other factors at play. I'm still going to be addressing the sexually acting out behaviors, but I'm just going to be doing it with the understanding that I'm treating part of something which is part of something bigger, and I might therefore be working with their team, and that's why I'm not very quick to say to someone, so I do use more, it sounds like the new, this, it's sex addiction. It's not, I'm going to usually say to someone very early on, it sounds like your relationship with sex is causing you problems. Let's explore it.
Right.
So the mood disorders is really important. So anyone that has that history of serious mental health problems, you and I need to know what that's about to have a context. I don't know if that's how you work, but that, for me, it's information gathering.
Yeah. I mean, as part of the intake, I generally am asking, is there a history of depression or, other mental health issues? The narcissism, not so much up front. Like it's not like I meet someone and immediately give them the assessment for narcissism. Like that's probably not a good idea. But as time goes on, I may look into that. And like, I don't know what it's like for you. Like we don't actually diagnose anything, right? So we just form like a clinical impression. I mean, I have the same DSM the psychiatrist has, so I mean, I can go look it up too, right? But I find that I don't run into a lot of untreated bipolar sex addicts. I've had a few, but they've been stable for many years, so it hasn't particularly been an issue for me. I run into a lot of depression that's maybe not untreated. And then I'm curious about, is this really situational on them being an addict? Like, are they mostly depressed about their sexual behavior? So if they get 3-4 months into recovery, does this lift, But if I think it's an issue, again, I'll refer them to a doctor or psychiatrist to just have a conversation. One thing that was really interesting to me is, this is a few years ago, I had a client coming in who was I think it was just porn. He was married anyway, and he had ADD. So he's in his late 20s. And so we have a fairly world-renowned expert in Dr. Bilkey, his name is, near where I live in Canada here, just north of Toronto. And so he went to him, and Dr. Bilkey, it's Bilkey or Belkey, he said, I have never met an adult with untreated ADHD or ADD, untreated, that did not have some addiction. Yeah, that's what I was like, oh, I've been missing this because I was not assessing. And there's some people that they're sitting there and they're like so obviously ADHD. Like within 10 minutes, have you ever been diagnosed with ADHD?
Yeah.
But a lot of them they're not that obvious, right? So I started paying a lot more attention to that. I don't know if you routinely assess for that or not, but there's so many overlaps between ADHD, like, trouble delaying gratification, loving novelty, like not just liking novelty, loving novelty. Their brains love it, right? Yeah. And so if I pick up on that, or I'm getting that sense, I'll really push them to go get it checked out.
Yeah, I hadn't realized the untreated. That was very interesting what you said about the untreated. But yes, I'm always very early on, same as you. I'm interested in sometimes it's obvious, but where I have a suspicion that there is something here that's been undiagnosed, that's why I said I will send them to a psychiatrist, because I also want to understand your point. Is this situational? How does it fit in with the depression? How does it fit in with autism, with ADHD, so that just we understand what we're working with, and then we can treat it in the client's best interests.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think some people are just malignant narcissists and that's what drives their sexual behaviors? And they're basically untreatable?
I do, actually.
Yeah. Okay.
I
And they
do.
don't stick around, right? Like they don't tend to stay in therapy.
No, when I did my radio show, I did one on narcissism about 2 or 3 months ago, and somebody wrote in and she described someone that really sounded like they're a malignant narcissist. And she said, "What relationship advice can you give?" And I said, "Get out the relationship."
Yeah.
And it's very rare that as a therapist, I will give advice or I will say there isn't hope, but if you really are in a relationship with someone who's a malignant narcissist, they're not going to do the work. And so if you're in there, get out. And they are going to have lots of sex with lots of people, whether you want to call it addiction or not, for their instant gratification. It may or may not be compulsive. It doesn't matter. The point is they don't want to be treated. And the moment you try to explore it with them, if they come to the therapy room, and I have very few who show up in the therapy room, the moment you go near the underlying causes, they're out the door. So it's a depressing answer to your question, but yeah, I fear so.
Yeah. Well, I think it's just good for people to be aware of that reality, because I've come across partners and addict, well, both, where they're just in a relationship with a malignant narcissist. And I haven't come across many in my practice, but I have come across a couple, and they're not treatable. I won't work with them either. I'll refer them out. You can't fire clients. You can, but technically you really can't. So you refer them out. And then, and I'm thinking of one guy in particular, and he never stuck with anything. They just bounced around from therapist to therapist, but he was only seeing me to convince me he was recovered so that his wife would take him back and he'd get his wife and kids back. That's the only reason he's come to therapy. They always have an agenda, I find, right? And as soon as they realize they can't train you to their way of thinking or buy into their agenda, they're gone.
Yeah. And I was going to say, and that's what makes the work with the betrayed spouse really hard, because the malignant narcissist does the breadcrumbing bit. Oh, I'll go to therapy. I want to change. So she's hanging on to that.
Yeah.
She's hanging on to the hope that I think and very, very difficult work, but I'm with you. I don't see them very often. They generally don't want to show up. And if we call them out, they're not going to like it. But it's very hard because the trauma bond, and that's another discussion for another day, but what Patrick Carnes would call that trauma bond is so strong that it's really, really hard for the spouse to walk away, because they're so depleted. And, on top of having been gaslighted and lied to for so many years, their self-esteem, as it is with all betrayed spouses, but in particular, when you're married to a malignant narcissist, is almost non-existent.
Yeah.
So the idea of having some agency to be able to do your own thing it takes years to escape from a relationship. But I'm working at the moment with a woman who has been with her partner for many, many years, and it's taken about 2 years, but she is breaking away from him. It's a wonderful piece of work. And it's so, we're digressing now, but this is someone who's very competent in her professional life, highly intelligent. So sometimes we imagine this kind of, little victim person who's been beaten on, emotionally. And this is someone, it's so subtle and poisonous. And but there's hope, because she's doing it. She's breaking away, and through doing some group work herself, she's begun to recognize her own self-worth.
Yeah, good for her. Okay, Gavin, any final words or thoughts to someone watching this that may think they have a sex addiction, a partner that thinks maybe their husband or wife has one, or maybe even therapists watching this? Any final thoughts?
Oh, it's a broad question. Final thoughts. I think what I'm still sitting with is your question about, success rate, and what I want to say to anyone who's watching it, addict or partner, yes, it's a journey. And I know that's very cliched, but you and I work, it's true. It's a journey of several steps, but you and I work with individuals and couples who come to see us broken. And that's why I think I said it's shattered dreams. And yet they go on this journey. And I have worked with couples who get to a level of intimacy that invariably wasn't there before the discovery. Mm-hmm. So it's not an excuse. It's just like something was broken in the first place. That is broken, maybe is the wrong word. There was a lack of intimacy there in the first place. And very often couples will discover part of the process of, now I get why I chose my partner. I chose someone who was as emotionally developed as me. Mm-hmm. They chose a really bad way to deal with it. Mm-hmm. I don't applaud their behavior, but now we've reached something that we didn't even have before. Mm-hmm. We've reached a level of intimacy and fulfillment. So I want to end and say something hopeful, that for the partners or the addicts, if you work this process, I've seen so many positive cases of people discovering the thing that the addicts often fear the most is what they want the most, which is intimacy. And I've seen people just achieve it. And so that's what I want to say. And to the therapists, yes, it's really hard work. Get some kind of training, whichever one you do, in working with sex addicts and their partners.
Yeah. Thanks, Gavin. Brilliant. All right. Well, that was a great conversation. Thanks.
And we didn't talk about, I also wanted to talk, so another time, I wanted to talk about this, by the way, I just want to add it because it's really, really important, just really briefly, that the work you and I do is that we're not sex positive, or that we're trying to, I guess we touched upon it about not being the sex police, but I think the criticism is that we're trying to stop people having the type of sex that they want to have. And again, the other thing that I do with individuals and couples is I want you to have whatever consensual adult sex you want to have. I want you to find your definition of healthy sex, and your definition will be different to mine. It will be different to someone else's. But the fact that I use the addiction model, it doesn't mean I don't want you to find your healthy sexuality. I'm going to encourage you to do that. And I just want to say that because I think the criticism against people who do the work that you and I do is that we are somehow shaming sex, and it couldn't be further from the truth.
Well, I totally agree, and I'm glad you said that. And I've even had, couples come into me and the porn use has come up, and we don't actually address it because that's not their agenda. They're there to see me about something else that's going on in the relationship. And one of the first things we learn as therapists is we don't put our agenda on the clients. Mm-hmm. And of course I'm like, oh, you watch porno, so let's, and there's a part of me that wanted to jump on that, but I didn't. And we did some good work on some of these other issues. And at some point down the road, if they find that this is becoming a problem, then maybe I'll see them again, right? But it's just kind of funny to me that we're accused of being prudish or sex negative and all this stuff. I mean, it's ridiculous, I'm all for great sex, and I tell people, I say, here's an idea. Tell me what you think. What if all your sexual energy is only directed to your partner in a relational and connected way? And I don't think I've had a single person not like that idea.
Yeah.
Great. So okay, let's go for that.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. I really want you to have great relational, connected, intimate sexual activities with your partner. Or not. If you're in a monogamous relationship, though, that's kind of the point, that is only for your partner. But, if you want to, I help people, say they're a single guy, younger guy, and they're dating around. I'm like, well, let's talk about what is healthy sex for you. Like, you could hook up every night on Tinder with someone you don't know. Is that what you want? Like, if that's what you want, just tell me, that's fine. Let's figure out, but it's funny because no one ever says that that is what they want, actually. It's really interesting, right?
Yeah.
So we go through it like, okay, I don't want to have sex with someone I haven't known at least 3 months. I'm not going to have sex with someone that we haven't talked about safety or if they're clean. I don't want to have sex with someone that, I'm under the influence of alcohol. Like, we go through all that stuff. So anyway, I'm glad you said that, because I think we
Shut up. Yeah.
pigeonholed by it, strangely enough, other therapists, like the sex positive, which is a strange term to me, actually, when I think about how they co-opted that term. And it's like, no, nothing's further from the truth, right? So
the goal is, I want you to have healthy sex as you define it, not me. And so, because I often get asked that, so what's the goal? I get the goal of recovering from alcohol is generally, it is for me anyway, it's abstinence. I don't do harm reduction when it comes to just my approach to alcohol or substance abuse. But the goal here is, it's healthy sex. Yes, it's things like having a spiritual awakening, and it's discovering yourself. But ultimately, in pure sex terms, I want you to enjoy healthy sex and intimacy, which is something that probably you never have done.
Yeah.
And then people get hopeful, and then they get excited. I love the way you framed it, Paul, about having connected relational sex. That word relational is so important, because the shame is realizing that it's not relational sex if I'm watching it on screen or with a prostitute, or that's not relational sex.
Right. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned that. And I just had a thought and it just slipped away. Darn it. Okay, hold on. Give me a few seconds here. You just said something and it made me think of something else. It's gone. Okay. Well, maybe
as soon as we finish this, you're gonna.
I'll remember.
I got it.
I know.
Yeah.
We'll save that for another interview, maybe, Gavin. Anyway, once again, thanks for your time and sharing your experience, your wisdom, your insight. And my hope is that this brings some clarity and understanding to, other therapists that just about what we do. And I want to put that challenge out there to you if you're watching this, and you feel at all called into this. It's a very challenging line of work for sure, but very, very rewarding. And it's only going to present more and more, and you owe it to yourself to at least, this is why I do trainings. If you're watching this and you want to do more trainings, send me an email, and I'll be happy to talk to you about that. But I think we need to become equipped and aware of this growing problem, so that we can like, people, we're the helpers of our society, at least one of them anyways. There's other helpers, social workers, doctors, psychiatrists, but we are one of the helpers, and people really, really desperately do need our help. So anyway, thanks again, Gavin. Have a great rest of the day over there in Monaco. Yeah, it was great to connect, and hopefully we can stay in touch and talk again. So cheers.
I hope so. Thank you for the opportunity. All the best. Take care. Bye-bye.